good, right?
I think so.
Like no sudden movements. My gosh. I'm sure it's going. Give it a second. Have some folks jump on here. Looking good from our angle, Max.
And it's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear. I think I adjusted it from high HD just to HD because apparently, I guess Facebook can't handle it. So I don't know what Mark Zuckerberg's doing, but get your platform right, man. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, everyone, welcome to Overtime with Coach Blue and Athletic Director Marissa. It's so good to have you guys here.
Hello.
Sorry about that. We are experimenting with some new cameras and whatnot, and nothing talks to each other. Have you noticed?
You think all
this? It's kind of like relationships sometimes, isn't it?
Technology would get this to work, but
absolutely. But we are here. We're live. We're ready to go. Thank you all for joining us. Remember that if you can't stay on with us today because you're at work and you don't want to get fired, this will be published as a podcast later this week. So don't worry. This is our talk show. We jump on here and talk about things, questions that you guys might have, topics that we've noticed that need to be addressed, and it's your chance to interact. Feel free to throw some questions and comments our way, and we talk about everything, Marissa, from addiction recovery, mental health, trauma-based recoveries. We're talking about just therapy in general. Let's get some questions going. We do have a few here that I want to address today.
Okay.
But before we get rocking and rolling, we are now in Sober October. We just hit
Sober October.
We just through September Recovery Month, and man, we were busy.
Yep.
And we got some cool things on the horizon with Team Addict to Athlete the last couple of months of this year. It's going to be, we're going to finish off pretty strong.
Heck yeah.
And for all you Patreon subscribers, I want to give you a special shout out and thanks for everything that you do. We just got a bonus episode today. We're talking about the signs and symptoms of emotional abuse. It's something that I've noticed that there's not a lot of talk about, and sometimes emotional abuse goes unnoticed for quite some time. So if you're a Patreon subscriber, that is up and ready for you now. And Marissa, we should give a shout out and thanks to all of our amazing Patreon subscribers.
Absolutely.
These guys make it possible for us to push this podcast out further to get it into the ears of those who truly need it. So you have a list of all of our absolute amazing champions out there that we can praise and high five virtually.
Absolutely. So we want to thank our super fans, Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Chris Williams, Sensei KP Brown, Patrick Forsyth, Brock Ellerman, Christy Case, and Kel Lim. Thank you, super fans.
Yeah.
Then we want to thank our rookies, Sherry Polson, Earl Dyer, Wendell Wood, Brad Waldron, Ronan D. Loesch, and Sione and Mary Inuk. And our pro level is Justin Robbins, and our champion level subscribers are Shad and Freya Robison and Andrew Baird. So thank you to all our Patreons. If you want to become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/addicttoathlete, and you can see if there's a tier that works for you. If you prepay, you get 16% off. The cheapest tier is $2 a month, and you get all the bonus episodes, and then you also open for exclusive gear just for our Patreons, and they help us keep this podcast going.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much for jumping in with that too. I love the Patreon outlet because we are able to give you something back for your donations. So thank you so much. There's some cool things on there already. $2 a month, backlog podcast, everything that we have so far, you can start binging just like a Netflix series, right?
Yes. And I think we have 40, 50. I mean, we have quite a few. So you become a Patreon, you get to watch all or listen to all of the back ones as well.
Absolutely. So jump on there, patreon.com/addicttoathlete.
All right. So Flo just got on here and said, hi, Coach Blue and General Robinson.
Ah, look at that.
I like that.
Yeah, Coach in General. I love
Maybe
that.
you should call me General.
Look at that. General. That's
We've been talking about a nickname for me. And
that's right. General. The General. I dig it. They get good insurance too, from what I hear. Flo, thank you so much for jumping on here. For all of you guys listening right now, Flo and Jonah, they're out there in I'm going to say God's country, out there in the Uinta Basin on the Ute Reservation. They are the coaches of our Addict Athlete team out there, and dedicated coaches out there. So thanks, Flo and Jonah, for all that you're doing. We look forward to coming out there and hanging out with you guys here a couple weeks. So
in fact,
good stuff.
Jonah's just going to start doing groups again back at the Thompson House. They've had a break, and we appreciate all of the volunteerism that they do there. And we also want to hi to Dustin Weaver, listening from Texas.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, listeners, today we're going to jump into a few topics, both of which have to do with relationships. And the comment and question that we received was specifically talking about how do I know if I am emotionally crossing lines with a coworker? There's an interesting thing that happens with this, with emotional, we call them emotional affairs, right?
Oh, okay.
And emotional affairs are relatively different than physical affairs, but they have the same components to them, and they can be just as damaging to a relationship.
Yeah.
But they happen for a very specific reason. And emotional affairs can be different for everyone. I mean, typically it's a progressive type relationship where friendships start moving into territory that probably needs to be recognized sooner than later.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot in relationships that have some kind of dysfunction in them, by which a spouse or a partner may not feel as though there's an emotional connection or bond that can be met emotionally, meaning things that are troubling your heart are not quite landing the way they should on a spouse or partner. And so we withdraw, and sometimes that comes, through addictive behaviors, where if you have an addictive spouse or a loved one, that they kind of pull away from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of seek that from somewhere else. Or maybe it's, you've got some stuff that you believe you can't communicate with them.
Yeah.
And instead of testing the waters or maybe seeking some kind of help, that emotional, I guess, download goes to somebody that's probably, viewed to as a friend. And it usually typically happens with coworkers and things of that nature. And it really does take a lot of effort, I think, to realize that this is kind of the path of it. And,
because a lot of times you're right. It just starts out as something simple like
Absolutely.
friendship and somebody that you're just, another person you're talking to and sharing stuff with.
So if you think about it, it's different than other affairs, and it occurs when another person looks for outside reassurance and emotional support. And everybody needs support in their lives. I mean, that's something that we pretty much bank on. But the emotional affairs are an example of how, when we look outside the bonds of a relationship for certain needs to be taken care of, it can absolutely take an ugly turn.
Yeah.
And I hear this a lot. This is kind of a funny thing. Some examples of these emotional infidelity type experiences begin with something that could be labeled the work spouse. And I've heard this before, like he's my work husband or that's my work wife, which is already kind of a sticky title, maybe to label that. It's a little bit weird. Yeah. That's a special, initially platonic relationship that kind of aligns itself with certain privileges because of the time that's spent there. But what happens is there's all of a sudden some flattery and some validation, maybe some increased, attention, maybe some dependence on a work spouse, right? Like, I can't get this done without this person. And maybe you go through some pretty intense experiences with them because of whatever business you're running. And so stakes are high.
Yeah.
But what happens is that office perspective then bleeds into personal life. And that's where things can get a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Have you heard that term before?
Oh, yeah.
I have one of those. I do have a work wife.
Oh,
yeah.
What is it?
It's the general. Yeah. Over here. Then you got the gaming buddy. This is kind of new right now. And we're seeing this a lot with situations that happen with
a lot of online
younger
stuff.
adults, right? And we see things, between like online gaming and sport. And these things seem a little bit more, I would say, in the eyes of someone who may not realize they're doing it, tame, because the ability to meet isn't quite there, right? There's no... They may be on opposite sides of the country. It could be
world.
It could be a catfishing situation, so you got to be careful. But you also have to realize that those online relationships, they're still real.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? They're still real people.
And they spend a lot of time, interacting with them, talking with them. Yeah,
absolutely. And typically, it's part of a larger group, and then increasingly becomes kind of an emotionally attentive type person, and then those lines get blurred and crossed.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the last one that they talk about, an emotional infidelity type experience, would be someone that would be labeled a best friend. It may have been around longer than the primary relationship has.
Okay.
And I've seen this before too, where this might sound funny, but it doesn't have to be opposite sex. It could be
No,
the same gender based, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you're getting there, but you've also hear about it with even just parents and children as children get married, just leaning on mom and dad
Mm-hmm.
more than their new partner and spouse,
Yeah, absolutely.
causing problems in time to come.
Yeah. And so, the thing that was being asked is, how did this happen? I didn't even really see it coming.
Hmm.
And again, I would say the first thing happens with an innocent friendship. It's this stage of emotional fidelity that kind of happens with a friendship that's like geared towards camaraderie, right?
Hmm.
And again, it could be a coworker, it could be anybody. But what happens is you find yourself being more attentive to that friendship. And over time, that friendship starts to get into the way of your private life as well. And kind of bleeds into receiving special feedback. Maybe that dynamic, starts to increase to the point where there's a lot of conversation and communication. And typically the spouse on the other side doesn't recognize that because of course you're going to have those kind of
Coworker
relationships.
and
Yeah,
friends.
absolutely.
Yeah. But when you're starting to lean on personal stuff a little bit too much with that friend or that coworker, then that's where it becomes a problem.
Well, yeah.
That you're going to them with all of the things you maybe used to go to your spouse about or personal issues.
Yeah. And so you talk about that second part then, that crossing of the line. And in that stage, the emotional infidelity, a person may start to share deep thoughts and feelings with their friends and begin to, dive into each other's emotional experiences with a person that they, may not be able to emotionally download with, specifically their spouse.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the feeling of being better understood by this friend fulfills that desperate need for attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And, cribbing, the next one. This is kind of an interesting thing.
Mm.
This is where you start to complain now about your spouse or your significant other, right? And it's commonplace as an emotional affair continues for that relationship to really fulfill the unmet needs, which means that once you feel that sense of validation, you start even looking for more. And so sometimes even the smallest things begin to be manifested in larger things because you're starting to feel like, I felt so good to be validated, that then common things like, oh, my husband doesn't pick up his socks after he gets home from work, and then that can be blown into something bigger because you like the validation that's attached to it. So now it starts to happen where this nitpicking kind of like everything goes, right?
Yeah.
And then a fixation occurs, and a fixation is a scary thing. And this is typically where most people realize that there's something a little bit different about this, right? How would you describe maybe a fixation if you have a relationship by which now you're holding things back on purpose, things you could share with your spouse, but you're like, why even try?
Yeah.
I'm gonna, go have a conversation.
Yeah. You're just focusing more on this friend than your spouse. So even if it's like something new happens in your life, you think of messaging, calling, texting, talking to your friend before your spouse. And, outside of other things, you're thinking about them more than your partner.
And then that's when it really begins to get heavy, because then decisions are made for each other together, meaning like you start pitching out ideas or thoughts or feelings, and they start making your decisions. This is what you need to do. You need to go home and tell him if he doesn't do this, then it's game over. And to be quite honest, a lot of times that's geared towards their self-gratifying desire for a result, if that makes sense, because they also are feeling validated by you because, you're now taking their feedback. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so they're not going to give you the best advice all the time. They're going to try and separate that even more because, everyone loves a good drama. Everyone loves, does that make sense?
Or back up when you're maybe complaining about your spouse.
Absolutely.
And just, oh, you're right. Validating those feelings and frustration that you may have.
And then this is where you start having conflicts with your spouse and you're saying, well, no one in particular, but, hey, Carol's saying this. And so she's right because I see you doing that. And you're like, who's Carol? What are you talking about? Or Jonathan at work saying this. And you're like, who's that? Right.
Backing up a little bit more. Yeah,
absolutely. Then comes this disillusion with home life. It's like, I'm always gone. I don't want, it's this emotional kind of isolation. It's a cold shoulder. And then, of course, if it doesn't get rectified, that's typically going to lead into some kind of separation, either temporarily or for good.
Well, and I think that disillusionment is when all of a sudden the grass is greener, and you start seeing things that just because it's not there every day, all of a sudden that should be, is that what you think is better? And that's going to absolutely cause problems. Yeah.
So now the thing is you always feel like there's going to be a good and bad person in a situation like this. You have to understand that both individuals play part in this, both of them. And it doesn't mean necessarily that, the person who's having the emotional affair is, dare I say, always in the wrong. Because if for some reason they're not feeling or understanding that you care, that you're withdrawn, and I'm telling you, warning signs and flags have been raised way before this happens, then we also have to look in the mirror of the person who might feel as though their spouse is emotionally cheating and take a look at yourself as well to find out, what am I not doing that's causing some of this emotional distancing? Sometimes you'll find that it is. Maybe you're preoccupied with something. Maybe you haven't been open to conversation. Maybe you come home tired and you don't really feel like chatting or whatever. But relationships out of inconvenience are kind of what it's all about.
Well, and I like how you say that, instead of, because absolutely that should be wrong on the spouse's part, is that they're leaning on someone else. But to take some internal questioning and investigating and say, why would they maybe be leaning on someone else? Where am I not maybe holding up on my end of the bargain? Or what do we need to increase in our relationship so that there is more emotional safety and currency that we can invest in each other, rather than my spouse wanting to even look somewhere else? Not that is okays it, but we should do, self-reflection.
Well, we should. And the problem with that is most people don't like doing that, because then it admits that maybe we're not the victim. Maybe we're also part of the problem. And I'm a firm believer that if both parties can kind of see their part in this, amazing things can occur. And don't get me wrong, guys, in this day and age, there's so much going on. There's so many distractions for attention, specifically if you've got children and full-time jobs and economies and finances and all this stuff, that it's hard to take time as spouses, husband, wife, partners, to sit there and just, talk and communicate. Most of the time, what I hear when I get into these situations with folks, and I've met with many people, they say, there came a time where it just felt like I lost my best friend. So it's like, it didn't just happen from day one. I mean, it was a gradual thing too.
Well, and sometimes it's so gradual, you don't notice until it's too late. And
Absolutely.
So far.
And there's a lot of trust that has to be involved in here. I think one of the biggest things that kind of takes a hit that most people don't know is that through repeated experiences of being shot down or pushed away or neglected to a certain degree, kind of reverbs itself in this lack of trust. Like, I can't trust this person. And men, sometimes we want to solve the problem, right? We're good problem solvers, right? We want to put a little oil grease on it and call it good. But sometimes we just have to listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to hear. I mean, I remember times when, I'd come home from crazy days and you just needed to download your day of like how crazy and chaotic it was to raise all these kids under the age of 6. And, and I remember you saying, I need adult conversation. And I'm like, I just had 8 hours, 10 hours of adult conversation. And but it's like, you need that. Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's part of it.
It's rough.
Emphasizing communication is one of the biggest things, right? But here's the deal too, is the validation that someone gets when they seek for that emotional support may not be able to be replicated by you, because again, it's a fictitious relationship to a degree, right? It's having all the benefits of being able to have someone's ear without having the consequences or, the situational things that need to take place, that without the work, so to speak, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think it's a little bit nicer, because all of a sudden it is better because you don't have them 24 hours a day. And, so it seems like it's better because you just get the best side of that person.
And many times what I found is that when a spouse starts to kind of push away, and we say evaluate your stuff, this doesn't mean that you're just a victim to this. I mean, if you are not taking your recovery seriously, if you're not taking your relationship seriously, if you're, this is a big one now, if you're, coming back and you're just hibernating and staying away and out in the garage tinkering around or playing games or doing the things that emphasizes isolation, which I've got to be careful with. I do that sometimes. Like I told you yesterday, I come home, like, I just want to go play Batman. It was a rough day yesterday.
But again, you said,
Played for an
hey,
hour,
I
came
need
back.
to go.
Uh-huh.
And because that's how you decompress. So it's still a coping skill that you use. But being able for you to say that to me, like, gosh, that was a rough day yesterday. I need to go decompress with Batman.
With Batman. Play a little Batman on
and
the
I was
Xbox.
like, that's fine. Just don't, if you don't mind,
don't stay
till 2 a.m.
Yeah, and it was cool. I came back.
And
we
you
watched some
did.
videos. We lit the pilot light on the fire, and
we tried to not blow up the house, and
that was
it
a little
worked.
scary.
So.
Justin, if you're listening, we might need you to come look at it. But that's the thing, right? Is communication, and it was one of those things where I put a time limit on it. But that's the thing; it's taken us years to get to that point.
Yeah.
But on the same breath, like, you've also had to say, hey, you're pushing it too far, or you know what, you're doing so much. It's like if you're a baker, the last thing you want to do is go home and make bread, right? If you're a therapist, the last thing you want to do is go home and talk.
Yeah.
But you have to. Kids got to eat, and we got to communicate.
That's a little tougher,
right?
Yeah.
I remember talking to one of my friends years ago, and we were on a little road trip, and it was funny because we were talking the whole time, and when we got to our destination, he's like, "Man, I've never had a conversation that's lasted that long." And he spoke about how his relationship with his spouse was such that they'd bury themselves on their phone or a book, and it would just be a ride in silence for 4 or 5, 6 hours, wherever they're going. I remember thinking, that's very rarely us.
Yeah.
Very rarely. And I'm thinking that's a sad thing.
Yeah. I think one thing I think is important is being able to watch for ways that your spouse or your partner is inviting you into connection.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we think it needs to come a certain way, but there's so many different ways that people are trying to invite you to connect that you turn down because you don't recognize it as an invitation to connect. And if you maybe just pay attention to different ways, maybe your children or a friend or for sure your spouse is inviting you to connect, whether it's, hey, can you come help me do the dishes? Maybe that's not about the task of doing the dishes.
Oh, that's why you always invite me to fold laundry.
But it's an invitation to connect. And then you start talking while you're doing the dishes. And that's the real important piece. It's not maybe the job or the situation, but it's an invitation to connect.
Well, what I've noticed with human relationship, and specifically in married couples in very serious partnerships, and really with people in general, there are 3 things that we all need, that every person needs. And if you'll take notes of this and you apply this, your relationships will be amazing. First of all, every person needs to be seen. Right? Eyes need to be cast. We need to be in proximity to be able to see them. It's like the Avatar guys, right? They're like, I see you. And they do that really cool thing, right? Yeah. It's a big deal because to be seen means that I'm important enough to be in your field of view. So it sounds kind of funny, but it's like this, there's been times when our schedules have been so intense that I'm like, dude, I haven't seen my kids today. And like last night I hadn't seen, my kids, and now we got Boston, who's a 16-year-old, and all of a sudden he's hibernating in his room. So I just go, she's rolling in there. Hey buddy, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because I need to see them.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to be seen. The next one is everyone wants to be heard, right? Listened to, right? And this is a big deal. Listen to is very different than just hearing. Because, I remember this when Marissa and I were first married. She would say something to me, but I'd be like watching the Jazz game and it would go in one ear and out the other. And I kind of look at her, I'm like, well, yeah, it's fine with me. And she's like, what do you mean? It's fine with you. I'm not even asking a question that would result in that answer. Are you listening? Oh. And so I realized I've got to look at her so that I know does that make sense?
Yeah.
Little did I know it was ADHD back then. But, and so that's the thing, right? Is you can be present and people can be talking, but you could be off in another world, a conventional listening in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
So they want to be heard.
Distracted by something else you're doing.
And the last one, most important, is people want to be understood, right? So if you hear them, they want you to be able to pull understanding from that. This is why. Now, I've noticed most relationships have a hard time with this one because they want you to just know. And if
Mm.
I'm guessing what you need and not understanding, I'm guessing wrong all the time. Does that make sense?
And then people get upset with that because they think
Mhm.
you should know. We've been married 20 years. You should know. But
We've been married almost 24 years now.
I know, I'm just
Yeah.
throwing that out.
Okay.
But you need to be able to pay
Yeah.
attention and find ways to not just assume and have that expectation that they need to understand, but be clear.
Yeah. So in a relationship, to be heard and to be understood, that means something very important to everyone. And even if you're the hibernating kind of isolating, I want to hide from life, you still feel that way. It
Yeah.
just may be a lot less to a degree, but everyone has those components to them. And so if it's important to your spouse, can you imagine how important it is for your kids?
Yeah.
Right? So when they find someone that sees them, that hears them and understands them, and it's not you, you can almost bank on the fact that they will be gravitationally pulled away from you.
Yeah.
So what do? You invest, right? You
Yeah.
invest in that person.
Well, and being able to do those things with your children teaches them how to have relationships, how to have healthy relationships, and what to look for in relationships. And if
Mhm.
you can have those things with your children first, they need to have relationships where they're seen, heard, and understood with people outside of your home and
Oh,
outside
yeah.
of my mom and dad. But you want that to be able to be first and foremost with yourself and your spouse, with your children.
Absolutely. And if you don't do this, then your kids will grow up to do the same kind of thing, which is really kind of sad, you know? So when
Mhm.
you look at the whole spectrum of all this kind of stuff, you start to understand that relationships, although very complex, can be very easy if you allow the process to happen, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're getting into a spot where, there's a lot of ignorance or frustration or anger, you might want to get counseling sooner than later. I can't.
Resentment's been building
Mhm.
because oftentimes, mostly if your gears down the road and you're recognizing there's something off, like we've talked, sometimes it's because it's very late in the game or too late in the game
Mhm.
then there's years and years of bad behavior and resentment that you now have to dig through and
Yeah.
fight.
I remember my mother doing this quite a bit. And I remember she would have a lot of her friends over and they would, criticize and be very cynical about people and relationships and whatnot. And I remember just thinking, like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And it made perfect sense because she was a very lonely person. Does that make sense? And to seek that validation was, hear me, but I'm taking no advice.
Mhm.
You got to be careful with that. And so on my mind with the things we dropped today on Patreon with the emotional abuse cycle,
Mhm.
it kind of reminded me of this question about this, because if you are an emotionally abusive person, that means you're seeking control, right?
Yeah.
And you're conditioning your partner, your spouse, to be subordinate.
Yeah. Submissive.
They
Yeah.
will have to go to someone who can see them, hear them, and understand them. So you've got to take a look in the mirror. And I'm not saying that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But there's a breakdown somewhere and you both have to be accountable to it. It's a hard one. This
Yeah.
happens a lot in addiction recovery because the person that's had the addiction, if not both of you,
Mhm.
typically is emotionally bankrupt. They're just not available, right?
Yeah.
And then we wonder why, when we get sober, they don't trust us or the conversations are over.
Mhm.
And it's hard. I mean, there's a difference between uncomfortable and comfortable silence in relationships, right?
For sure.
What do you think comfortable silence is? I remember when I first experienced this with you, I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. Like, how would you define that? Comfortable silence.
Well, it's just you're not questioning or second guessing what the other person is. He mad? Is that why he's not talking? Or sometimes it's just something you can feel that there's tension in the air. And so is it because he's mad, or is it out of struggle with confidence that you think you did something? Did I do something? Did I say something? Rather than just it's quiet
One of
and
the
everything's
things
fine.
my stepdad would always say to my mother, and it drive me nuts because it was like 15,000 times an hour. Are you okay? Is anything wrong? Are you all right?
Mhm.
Are you okay? And I'm like, dude, if she's not, you're going to piss her off and then we're all going to get it. Right. But like, and I could tell him like, and the older I got and the more understanding I started to develop, it was like, he was so insecure with that relationship because she was so cold that like, he was always unaware.
Trying to check and find out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know that my mother found relationships with other people. I mean, it was one of those things she did. And so she didn't have to divulge any of that stuff with her spouse because, you know, he was really not that significant, which is sad.
And that's easy for her to get mad at him because he is bugging her and she just wants a break.
So that's also got to be maybe a warning sign or a red flag that if your spouse keeps constantly asking you, are you okay? Are you all right? That's because you're not talking. And so they're guessing and they're guessing wrong. So even if you are okay, right? Explain that. Show them. Lean into it. But literally, if you're falling out of love,
you've
address it.
We have a question here. How do you deal with the controlling type you talked about just a minute ago?
So if you're not a Patreon subscriber, right? I'll give you a little tidbit there. The controlling aspect of this is crazy. And trust me, that is the number one causality of emotional abuse is the controlling behaviors. It's the limiting in relationships. So a lot of times what happens in emotional abuse is that spouse will put a wedge in between them and people. So like, and typically it's like family, people that can support that person. And the controlling thing needs to be addressed and pointed out quickly because you are not to be subordinate to another person. You're supposed to be equal. And if the insecurities they have are bleeding over into the relationship and they're trying to set these unrealistic boundaries over you
to control you so that they feel better,
they're going to be doing it in small increments, which means they're trying to condition you. How would you explain classical conditioning? Because what happens is it's not an all at once wall building to isolate you and to control everything that there is. And they're doing that simply because they are afraid. They don't know what to do with this relationship. You are bigger than them and it intimidates them. So
it's usually out of insecurity.
Exactly. So so a conditioned response, if I'm going to condition someone, am I going to like wrecking ball them right away?
No.
What am I going to do?
It's just going to be slow and repetitive. And they're going to start out something small, you know.
It's going to be like, let's not have you go shopping for that. You know, like we don't need it. Or it's, you know what? Nah, I don't think you need, you know, new shoes or a new dress right now. Or it could be, you know what? We spend every other weekend with your parents. I want a weekend off, right? It's these small little things that kind of like catch you. And here's the problem. And again, I don't want to give too much away for the Patreon folks, but here's the problem. When you meet someone, you fall in love. And that's a great feeling. We've talked about this before, but you fall in love. That initial state of falling in love is the best. You want to spend time and just experience and just you want to be next to that person. It's temporary insanity, right? You want to just be there.
High, intense emotion.
It feels so good. It's the best thing ever. But then what happens is once someone who has a controlling behavior, they're not going to show you their cards all at once because they've got to hook you. They got to get you in. And a lot of times this happens because you have characteristics and things that they don't. So they see your empathy, they see your eagerness, they see your ability to produce and create and to do these things. And they're like, I want that, but I want it just for me. And so,
or they see that there's maybe some past trauma and some things that you're a people pleaser and they think this could work really well with the things I need because they can feed my insecurity.
And I don't want anyone else to know about it. Right? It's like when you find a favorite restaurant, you're like, don't tell anybody about this restaurant because then they'll, same principle. And so you fall in love deeply. And then once you're married, once you've gone through the temple, what have you, they got you, right? And that's when it starts happening. It starts happening slowly. A classical condition means that I'm going to do it ever so slightly. It's like this. I give this description to a lot of people. If I gave you this bottle of water, Marissa, that's sitting here in front of me, and I said, hey, you want to taste this Gatorade? And you're like, okay. So you taste it and you're like, that doesn't taste like Gatorade. It's water. But I kept forcing it on you. And I said, you are wrong. This is Gatorade. And every time I gave it to you, I made you truly like understand this is Gatorade. And I pounded it into your head. After a while, you just submit and be like, all right, I guess it's Gatorade. But then one day you're walking with this water bottle and someone says, hey, let me take a hit of that water. And you're like, it's Gatorade. They drink it and they're like, dude, this is water. And you're like, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
See, I've conditioned you to have that response, right?
Yeah.
So it's shorter. So all of a sudden
Slow
you
and
start
repetitive.
a person in a relationship, in a controlling relationship, they start feeling like they're the problem.
Yeah.
Because that spite talk, that poking and poking and poking. And then when you like say, hey, stop poking me, they're like, I'm just asking questions. Why are you getting so mad? Then you feel like,
gaslighting.
yeah, you feel like you're the aggressor and they're the victim.
Yeah.
And so that needs to be addressed immediately.
And I think oftentimes it may start with something simpler where it's just a little bit of Gatorade mixed with the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's easy for them to say, yeah, it is Gatorade. And you don't, I know it tastes kind of like water, but there's a little something in there. And then it's a little bit more Gatorade.
Absolutely.
You know, if you freak out the first time when it's for sure Gatorade, they'll back it off and try a different
controlling attributes are insecurities that person carries.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, you will not be able to point those out to them because they won't believe you. And in fact, they may increase the control because they don't want you to peel back some of that.
Or to address it.
It needs to be addressed with a mentor, with a counselor, with clergy. It needs to be brought out. And it sucks because the thing is it's typically a learned behavior, which means they've kind of learned it from somewhere. And if it's learned, it can be unlearned.
Absolutely.
You know, and the hard part about this is most of the time, if it gets too deep, they've separated you from all your support because they want to be the sole support to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to the point where you feel like no one will understand, no one will know, no one will believe me. And so you get stuck. And then of course they win. Yeah. So depending on the severity of it, it needs to be addressed, and it has to do with power and control, and it has to do with their own insecurities. This is something that I've watched my mother and sisters go through. You know, they were subjected to this, and they began to believe that that's as good as they could get, and it never ends well. Yeah. It's a sad, scary thing.
Yeah.
So if you're in a controlling relationship, you need to take a look at it and see, are they being critical with you? Are they being cynical with you? Are they isolating you? And if they are, this needs to be addressed, and you need to call it what it is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, I've seen this too. And I said this on the Patreon episode today, that, you know, when a spouse starts really going through like everything about you, they start going through all your emails and your phone and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not for purposes of like, you know, did someone email me or do this, right? It's, I want to see who you're communicating with. Mm-hmm. Because it's funny, like Marissa goes through all my stuff, and I told the Patreon subscribers the same thing. I said, you know, yesterday, like you caught an email that I completely missed that was kind of important from Spanish Fork City. And I'm glad you went through my email.
Yeah.
But I'm also glad you go through my email because again, and phone, because I'm a man and I have the same potential to fall to the risk of pornography and everything else that everyone else does. But because I know that my mechanisms of viewing are always going to be available to you, even the kids, and to any. I've given this phone to people on the team of Anatali to go take photos and stuff. That it's one of those barriers that keeps me okay. Does that make sense?
You keep it as a way to keep yourself in check.
It's not that the controlling behavior is, you know, they want to see if you missed the payment for the light bill. It's, I want to see who you're communicating with. If we have that kind of a relationship going, we've got to get some help. And if that person will not get help, you have to evaluate, am I okay with this? Is this a relationship that I can, you know, be all right with?
Yeah.
Because
it's worth it.
It should never be a subordinate relationship, which is wild because I know so many people, Marissa, that throw in the towel like that. And that is so not you. Like if I pulled any of that shenanigan with you, you'd be like, what the hell are you thinking, man? Like, does it make sense? Like you wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
You know?
But you don't allow it with me either.
No.
You know?
But that's the thing though, is but why? Because like we both had relationships, we both seen things in our lives that kind of put us on that defensive end.
Yeah.
But why would you stick up for yourself?
Because I'm worth more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, the relationship that we've developed doesn't really, I think, translate to everyone. But I learned and started having this epiphany once that she doesn't need me at all. Like if I got hit by a truck, that would be sad. And I hope you'd be sad, but you could carry on. You're a professional. You are not stuck. You are a go-getter. You are a powerhouse.
Yeah.
And you would be okay. And I'm sure you'd miss me, I hope.
Yes.
But on the same breath, right? Like, if I did something stupid, if I relapsed, if I decided to go crazy,
Yeah.
you'd be like, all right, man, well, see ya. And I don't want that. And so
Yeah.
what I realize is that you don't need me, but you choose to be with me. You
I
want
like
to be with me.
having you around.
That's a big deal. And it takes a ton of weight off my shoulders because I don't have to, like impress you, right? I don't have to like do things out of like desperation. I
or
can just
fear.
or fear.
Yeah.
I can just be myself because you choose in. So if you look at your relationship and you think like, I'm stuck here. Like I couldn't leave if I wanted to.
Mhm.
We have a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're choosing in because you feel that mutual love, you feel that mutual respect, and you see the potential and you're moving towards that, game on.
Yeah. This is one reason I've had lots of friends in unhealthy relationships, and many who felt like they needed to stay out of financial disparity
Mhm.
because they maybe didn't have a degree and hadn't worked and felt like, well, the only way to financially stay afloat for myself and or my kids is through my spouse. But I can promise you, even if you didn't have a degree, you didn't go to college, if you are managing a household, let alone to me, managing an abusive or controlling spouse, you can do anything.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Get yourself out from under that rock and go find a job, find
Yes.
whatever you need to do, and you can start doing it. It may not be like
Absolutely.
some kind of something you want on your resume, but yeah, you're handling a lot more than you give yourself credit for.
I do give my mother kind of the short end of the stick there many of the times, but one thing she was resilient, and unfortunately, she never allowed herself to truly
Flourish.
be loved and
Mhm.
flourish. But I'm telling you, like the minute she felt any kind of like disrespect or what, she was out.
Yeah.
Which sucked because sometimes that disrespect was like important and needed. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? Like what you're doing is idiotic, and
Yeah.
she's like, "We'll see ya." But
she was able to start over and start
Oh my
new
gosh,
and
yes.
find a new place to
many times,
over and over and over,
Mhm.
which is incredible.
Absolutely. And so, to sum this up, if you want to go deeper to see if you're on the receiving end, and again, emotional abuse is very, very different than physical abuse, than, sexual abuse. I mean, it's so different because it happens so eloquently to a certain degree that
Mhm.
like you may not notice. So jump on patreon.com/addictoathlete. $2 a month gets you everything and that episode as well.
Yeah. Any thoughts on how do you stick up for yourself in a healthy way as we close up?
Absolutely. This is one of the most important things. First of all, well, I should ask you this first because I have my own understanding of this. And a lot of it is, you who are listening to this are probably not the problem, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're seeking this for a very specific reason. But as I just said, for you to stick up for yourself, like, because there were times when you've done that with me even, and you've done that with past relationships, and you've done that with family. I've done that with family.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you would, and I'll give you my thoughts, but I'm curious how you would say.
I think sometimes I'm a little abrasive. And so I know not everyone can do that, and it's not appropriate in every situation. So if it means that it's strong and forceful, that's okay too. You know what I mean? You don't have to be kind and sweet to say, stop stepping on me.
Yeah.
But it just has to start. And some of it at first may be that you just stop trying to argue your point. Let's just let them talk and let them think they're being heard. And instead of fighting in an inappropriate way, but maybe it means to send a text or write a letter because they talk over you and push over you in every situation, and be like, I'm not okay with you treating me that way.
100%.
I don't know.
First and foremost, it's a privilege to have a relationship with you. It's not a right. And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around. And sometimes that pisses people off when they hear that. And I think, well, it's because you guys are the abusers, right? And think about that for a minute. It's a privilege to have a relationship with me. It's not a right. What does that mean to you, Marissa?
Yeah. If anyone wants to engage and have a relationship with me, they've got to they have to step up to my level rather than me stepping down.
Exactly.
And that's because I care enough about myself to only allow certain people to interact with me. And
Mhm.
that's a boundary. When we talk about boundaries, boundaries aren't things to tell other people what not to do. Boundaries are, like if you have your house and you have a fence around your yard, that's your boundary to keep your home,
Yeah.
your yard, your family safe inside the boundary of the fence. So a boundary is just saying, I'm staying here because this is what keeps me safe. And anyone that crosses that fence needs to commit to this kind of interaction or excuse yourself out.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, you have to have a belief system that makes that statement true. And it's a hard one when you have not had enough, I guess, emotional currency, exchangement between you and your spouse that would create an atmosphere like that. But we hold that to be true even with our kids. It's like the goofy neighbors we have, that, you know, beat their children on YouTube, right?
Mhm.
She didn't understand the fact that it's a privilege to have children. It's not a right. And the
Mhm.
state showed her that, like, you violated this and we're taking them.
Yeah.
And so she didn't lose her kids. They took them.
Yep.
It's a privilege, not a right. The second thing is to find out what is really going on. And instead of getting into a fight, talk, type control, talk conversation, it's help me understand what makes you think treating me this way is okay, because I don't understand. And what you do is you start to ask open-ended questions in a search talk manner to help them teach you what in the hell they're really doing. And that's a hard one too,
Mhm.
because they're going to want to fight with you. They're going to want to poke and spite talk you to get you to react.
Yeah.
And it's worked before. And they may say, I don't do that. You're out of your mind. Well, that may be the way you see it,
Yeah.
but the way it's landing on me really hurts. And I've got to understand what's causing this, what's going on, because I don't get it. You're putting them into the position to have them become the teacher. Most of the time, the person that's gone that far, they're not going to want to address it, because if
Yeah.
you start unraveling their scheme, then they don't have any more control. If you take that control away from them by, instead of fighting with them, like getting to the source code of what's going on, help me understand.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's how you see it, but this is what I see it. What do you think? You start getting into that kind of conversation with them where you're not allowing the fight to happen. They have to move with you. They can't keep fighting when you're not allowing their words or their lack of to be okay anymore.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a strong support system. And if you've been in a situation by which you've been emotionally abused, chances are there's been a wedge that they've put between you and the people closest to you. Which is why we started this whole conversation off with, these emotional affairs.
Yeah.
It's why it happened in the first place. And so this is where you go to family and friends and clergy and counselors,
Get other perspectives.
Mhm. But you gain multiple perspectives. You don't give it all at once. You give it to one person and one person only. You want to make the best educated decision for you.
Mhm.
Get help. Sometimes people need a mediator. Sometimes they need a counselor. I've done hundreds of family sessions where I don't even say a word. And I just sit there and listen. And as they go back and forth, just because there's another person in the room,
All of a sudden
they're
it's
a lot different. Yeah.
Mhm.
And if that person is so hell-bent on trying to prove you wrong and not wanting to change or to grow or to allow themselves to move from falling out of love into learning how to love and be loved, like, you're not allowing me to love you
Mhm.
because you're putting me in this situation and that doesn't feel like love to me.
Yeah.
Then is that person right? Because you deserve better and you deserve more. And that's a hard thing. And sometimes
Yeah.
it gets to a point where it can't be reconciled. But if the right things are applied and you guys realize that, you know what, we're out of sync,
There's humility on both
Mhm.
sides.
there's
Yeah.
got to be, then change can happen. But first and foremost, it's a privilege to have a relationship with you. It's not a right. And the same part, it even goes with the person you're talking to. It's a privilege to have a relationship with him,
Mhm.
not a right. But if he's not allowing that privilege to come to fruition, then there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
So either you choose in or you choose out, and not that I can't do this anymore. It's I'm not going to do this anymore. It's time to put your foot down. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing. These are real relationships.
Yeah.
And it's not as easy as just, well, fine, then I'm filing for divorce. I mean, there's all kinds of things there. But it's not meant to be a unbalanced relationship.
Yeah.
You cannot be subordinate. It's got to be equal, or else it's not going to work.
Yeah. And ultimately, it comes down to you. You've
Yeah.
got to be the one that makes the final decision and choice. And
Mhm.
that's a hard thing. It's understandable. And that mean, like you said, going to professionals, finding some outside voices and perspectives that may be able to see it a little different. And
On
then
Patreon, we
prayer.
do a deep dive on core communication too. I mean, there's episodes about core communication on our Patreon. So again, $2 a month. If you pay it all at once, it's like $12 or something, because there's a discount.
$16 per year.
Yeah, you can go back and listen to those too, because communication's more of a dance than it is something that we do. It's
A lot of practice.
It's very important. So go check that out too. And if you need help, jump in. We do lots of family therapy here. Blue Robinson Counseling, part of Addict to Athlete, and so that's one of the benefits we have.
Yep.
And I should speak of this as we start to close down too. Is that starting October 12th, it's a Thursday at 6 p.m. We're going to be start holding our closed group for pornography addiction.
Yes.
And so if anyone out there struggling with pornography, whether it be husband, wife, what have you, this will be a group that will be 18 years and older, and it'll be here every Thursday at home base. We'll put a link to the address and all that stuff here. Our first group will be held this Thursday, the 12th of October, 6 p.m. And this is one of those things that creates a lot of emotional distancing. This is a big issue. And I've, about the last 2 years, been doing a lot of deep diving into the differences between substance abuse, chemical dependency, and pornography. I've noticed a lot of people try to condense them into the same thing, but they're very different. And so we're going to be taking a different approach. It's free to the community. So, again, there's a lot out there, and I'm hearing a lot about some of the programs out there that maybe didn't work. Come give this a shot. Let's see. And it's for anyone that struggles with pornography, 18 years and older. So that being said, Marissa, we have our county to county relay coming up to raise funds for Project ELF. This is an opportunity for us to raise funds to help those who are in situations where Christmas could be bleak if we don't get some help.
Yeah.
And that's going to be this Saturday, right? We're going to be doing this next Saturday as a fundraising experience. And so it's the same day as the partial eclipse. So go check that out too. It's going to be awesome. Yep. Beyond that, reach out to us, addicttoathlete.org. You'll find all of our contact information. You'll find emails, phone numbers for Blue Robinson Counseling there, schedules, calendars, backlog podcasts, even the team store. Right there. Got some good stuff in there for Christmas coming up, all these holidays that are approaching. And I guess we should say, hey, we've got a new coach, a new recovery coach coming online soon. And I can't wait to share with you guys some of the stuff that they're doing and be doing in Southern Arizona. So we're going to be doing some cool things, opening chapters down there. But if you'd like to become a certified recovery coach for Team Addict to Athlete, to open a chapter of Addict to Athlete in your community, jump on the website, check under resources. You'll find a connection there. Watch the video on what it entails, and let's get you guys a program out wherever you're hearing this.
Okay.
Anything else on your side there, General? Nope. I like that.
That's it.
All right. Well, with that, athletes, continue to do your best. We're here to help. We're here to serve, and we're here to help you turn your mess into